And this is where many people struggle. Let's build this monster. Me. David knows. Do not put too much effort into it. It's marketing, all this bullshit. That's the best form of validation. We were like shitting ourselves. Yeah, ready to go.
Okay, let's start from the very beginning and go back in the days before HotJar. You tried yourself as a startupper. You worked in cooperation with your cousin. What can you tell us was the project you worked on?
There were multiple projects, actually. It's interesting that you brought that up. So my cousin and I, obviously, we started in the very beginning, very naively when we were very young. Well, it's not naive, really. When you're young, like the drive is mainly to make some money, right? And I think it's a good drive to have, because as long as you learn from your experiences, it means the next time you're going to do it better, right? So the very first thing that we did together was we kind of had a few clients together, and we were trying to do an agency, and we learned a lot about how difficult it is to run a customer-based company in terms of selling your time, repeatable business. So that was our first experience. The second time around, we tried to build, we were too young though, but we were trying to build basically kind of a concept like WordPress, but this was ages ago, right? But it was like basically this a SaaS-based tool where you would build a site and whatnot. But this was, well, I think this was nearly 20 years ago. So this was a long time ago. But the big learning thing we had there was, one, that we were too young, we were very inexperienced, we didn't understand business, but more importantly, we weren't thinking big enough, right? And this is something that I say a lot to many people that I advise or I help out, which is, it's great to bootstrap and to start small, but you have to think big, right? So the idea is, the concept is, it's very common to make the mistake of thinking about an idea that is limited to your community, or if you live in a small country. And then sometimes if you're limited by your ideas and the needs of your community, that can easily not scale, right? So I would say it's good to start small, right? Build something simple and get a few users, but your dreams and ambitions need to be big, because that's the way of how you really build a startup. So I'd say when I was working with my cousin, we didn't know that yet.
In one of your interviews, you said that you was doomed to fail, and so I bet it's because of lack of experience, and that because of you got a small vision of what you want to do, right?
Correct. So then after that, so there were two startups. So I went then because I realized I wasn't good. I didn't have enough knowledge more than experience. Like I didn't have enough knowledge of how to build a business. I said, okay, maybe it's more effective for me to find an amazing boss who I can join and be an intrapreneur. Right? What if I was within a business and grew that business? And I did that successfully with a couple of bosses. And it's something I highly recommend to young people who do not have no experience working within any company. I would say, like, it's misleading to see Zuckerberg and like Bill Gates, and we all think we can do that, right? We can all be Elon Musks, and that's dangerous, because these are all outliers, right? Facebook is an outlier, Microsoft is an outlier. It's not common at all, and it's unfair to yourself to try and live up to being a Zuckerberg or Elon Musk or whatever. So my point is, especially if you come from maybe an education, a background, a family where you have not been given structure or knowledge of how to build a business, then I usually give advice to young people: go join a business, but join a business where you love your boss, where he or she challenges you. They make you grow, right? Don't join a business where you hate your job and you hate your boss, because you're not taking anything away from it, right? So try and find a business, at least before you do your own thing, where you have a boss that you really, really admire, because you're going to take away a lot from that, both the good and the bad, and mold your business on the back of that. So I think that's a huge learning curve. So that's what I did. So I went and I worked for a software company and grew a lot inside, and I learned a lot about what not to do. like maybe hiring mistakes, mistakes about growing the business, being too focused about revenue and not about purpose and vision and the customer. And then I joined a consulting business in the UK, which was remote. And there I learned about that I wanted to create a remote company. I learned how important it is to be structured around operations, like processes, structure, roles being defined. There was discipline. I learned discipline that I didn't have before. So I took those experiences and I started to try to build my own startup, right? And I failed 2 times before HotJar. It's really important. So 2 failures. With the first failure was lack of thinking big, in the sense that I wrote a blog post about this. So anyone who wants to read about this can search David HotJar passion, and you'll find this blog post. Okay, great. So it basically talks about um, how passion sometimes can blind you. It's this whole idea, oh, I know a lot about cars, I know a lot about this, so why don't I use my knowledge to create something awesome which gives me an amazing lifestyle? But that's not how it works in business, right? Your passion is a multiplier, but should not be the reason why you build a business. So to go to my example, I had done parties quite a lot. I had done events quite a lot. It was my way of making money while I was studying. And I noticed there was this interesting thing, which is I knew this industry well, and then I knew optimization really well. And I realized, hold on, in the restaurant, in the hotel business, in events business, there is no analytics software and there's no like marketing automation tools. And I thought, what if I took everything I knew, condensed it and applied it to the area I knew really well, right? So I'm thinking me. David knows I can make money, blah, blah, blah. What I failed to do there, and by the way, we spent a year building this only to realize about this problem. Another big mistake. I'm seeing DoMVP behind you. That is like super important, right? So we didn't do MVP. So we're like, let's build this monster, which we're so sure is going to be amazing. Why? Because I know I can make money for people, right? Because I know that if companies use it, they're going to make a ton of money. Where is the flaw? The flaw is that there was no market for this product. And what does it mean when we say there's no market for the product? Because we use this words marketing, all this bullshit, right? What does it mean? It means there isn't a big group of people that wake up in the morning and say, I need this tool. Or there isn't a big enough group of people that are setting out their budget for next month and they say, hold on, let me put aside 200 euros to spend on this software because I need it. That is a market. That is where there is existing demand for, it doesn't need to be for a tool, it's for a solution or a result. And when that does not exist, you end up trying to educate, God forbid, you educate someone to want your product, or to change behavior. And that is impossible, right? Because you can't do that at scale. You can do it maybe if your software costs like 2 million euros a year or something. So very niche, right? And it takes you 1 year to convince them, and then it's a gold mine, maybe. But you can't do volume, big market stuff by thinking about yourself. So that's my 2 failures. I did that twice. So I did it once, and then I did it again. The difference was the second time I did it MVP, but I hadn't truly learned the lesson. I thought I learned the lesson. So it makes you realize, right, how much it takes time to really understand this. But I did an MVP, and what's good is we quickly transitioned, and that was the point where I said, hold on, I'm still failing to understand this concept of market. And then it became clear to me, like I've been in this industry, I'm using products every day that I hate, right? These products are critical for millions of businesses around the world that I know inside out. Why aren't I fixing the biggest problem I have, but more importantly, millions of other people have as well? And the thing is, I'm thinking big, and it's daunting because when you think big, there are going to be competitors. But actually, the big rule is, if what you're doing, there are no competitors, then that is actually a very bad sign versus the opposite of that. Exactly. It's the perfect sign that no one has the budget, no one is waking up in the morning needing it, right? So there's no competitor. So the advice I would give is, if there are competitors, don't worry too much about it. What you need to think about is, how are you going to provide more value, right? And it doesn't mean being cheaper. How do you provide more value? How are you going to do it in a different way, a more innovative way, a better way that the customer is willing to rave, to tell their friends about how better is this? It needs to be a quantum leap to be able to make people talk about it. So if your improvement is too small, that doesn't, it's not worthy of people saying, oh my God, this is a much better way of doing this, then you're going to struggle. So those were the main learnings I had there. I went on a rant there for you.
Okay, thank you for my story. And actually, you mentioned the MVP, and we will come back
Okay.
to that question a little bit later. Now you have very interesting background that you've been studying in a law school.
Yes.
Yes, but actually, your work was connected a lot with design and optimization of conversation rate. Right.
Mm-hmm.
My next question, like, what give you a passion to design? Like, how you turn from a law school to design field?
Yeah, it's a good question. So when I was in, like, I blame the fact that I ended up in law into the fact that, yeah, how long ago was that? Like 25 years ago, 20 years ago. Back then, they used to kind of, I was really young, right? So this was in my teens, 14, 15. Back then, there was this thinking that someone gives you help and sets you on the right road and profession, right? So I loved languages. So, and I love to, like, I am quite analytical and I like debating. So somehow they said, you should be a lawyer, right? And my dad was in politics, and in politics, everyone was a lawyer. So it was just something I aspired to. So yeah, I ended up doing law, but I think the big thing that law taught me was that, besides like giving me an awesome community of friends to have fun with, it actually taught me how to be a hacker. Now, it sounds weird, but I never went to lectures, so I barely did any work on law. But it taught me how, basically, how do I pass an exam in 2 days, right before the exam? Or if I have like an assignment to submit, how the hell am I going to manage? And it was this concept of hacking, getting data, notes, and like, so it helped me in that way of doing things with a short deadline. And then instead, during that time, I had tons of jobs, started businesses, and I was focused on the design side, which is what I loved. Looking back, if someone had to ask me, do you regret maybe not just leaving law school and just jumping into business? Maybe, but I think life is too short for regrets. So at the same time, like, I completed something that I loved, and interestingly enough, I think everything happens for a reason in life. Like, I ended up in an industry where all of a sudden, with the privacy law changes that are happening and whatnot, actually being the CEO of a company and a lawyer who did his thesis in privacy law is suddenly is a big advantage. So finally, I got something out of it. So yeah.
You was saying a lot in your blog and in other interviews that you've got a big passion for learning. For sure, doesn't matter if I'm talking about nowadays or back in the days, lawyers all over the world making good money, and probably with your passion for learning, nowadays you could make decent money for living. But why decide to say, like, hey guys, I don't want to do a law, I will do my own stuff and I'm gonna build up my own company? So what brought you to the
That's a good
entrepreneur
yeah.
path?
That's a good question, because you asked that before and I missed that part of the question. So I think it's the passion piece, right? Which is, I recently, the team that we formed a new content team at HotJar, and they started interviewing me, and they were like, okay, David, we want you to go way, way back to the very beginning. Where did it all start? And it was interesting. We're now calling these sessions therapy, I think. But it's interesting. I went way back, and it's interesting to think that my dad, when I was 5, 6 years old, we were living in Australia, and he had like an Apple computer and a printer, and he was doing publications there. It was a political reason for doing it, but I will never forget standing, like sitting up on his chair and looking into that. I still have it in my office, that Mac, the first Macintosh, and looking at it and seeing the interface and the cursor, and I was just completely absorbed by this concept of interfacing with a system, right? So to me, that was like the concept of media and interfacing and publishing thoughts and messages and communication, that just completely it really excited me, basically. And I knew this was something I was going to spend time on. Unfortunately, when I chose law back then in Malta, where I was living, because we moved back to Malta, there weren't any courses or, let's say, careers focused on this. So back now, it's obviously changed a lot, but there wasn't that many opportunities. So I guess I went and I created these opportunities on my own, even though I had to do this bloody law diploma, degree, and whatnot. So basically I just started learning on my own, right? So I started designing for parties, designing for friends. Back then it was more print, so you'd use a computer mainly to create print, right? So I got jobs, I created my own advertising agency. Then I had a big client who was a famous comedian who asked me, can you build a site? And I had no idea how to build a site, and I said, yeah, I'm going to build a site. And basically, this journey led me to a point where I was really frustrated that I couldn't measure all these designs that I'm creating. How do I know if they're good or not? Right? So this was the main frustrating. How do I know that this flyer I created was actually, did it do a good job or not? This website that I created, besides the client saying, oh, I love it, and maybe winning an award, how do I measure that it's good? This was pre-conversion rate optimization or growth hacking and all that stuff. So, and then what happened was, later in my career, I was lucky to join a Swedish software company where they were just at the beginning of conversion rate optimization. They were looking for someone to take the lead on this. And that's where I really felt home, which is this ability to measure the things you do, to do split testing, to do user research. And that's where I finally said, oh my God, this is fucking so exciting to be able to measure this stuff and to be able to back your decisions and the experience you design by data. And I guess the decision to build HotJar was kind of, in a way, going back and now offering a tool like HotJar to David 10 years before, when he was starting off and saying, how the hell do I measure this, right? So that is our vision. At HotJar, our vision is we want to change the way the web is built and improved by democratizing, we use this word democratizing, feedback and analytics. So it's this idea of taking these tools, which were very enterprisey and expensive to date, and putting them into the hands of students, tiny startups, people just starting off. And this is really incredible power to be able to see, how are people really using the site, and how do I measure if it's working or not, and what are people saying to me? And I think we're probably enabling and empowering this new breed of people that are going to create like experiences at the core of the business, as opposed to build a business and the experience is like an afterthought. So that's the big picture.
Wow, fantastic. And actually, you mentioned HotJar, so I bet it's a time for that question. I know you answered it probably a million times already, but I have to ask it. Can you give me a brief intro about what is HotJar and like what it stands for? Just 2-3 sentences will be enough.
Sure, absolutely. So HotJar is basically a tool that shows you exactly how your site or web app is being used. So what is actually being used and what is ignored. And more importantly, you can then on the back of that understand why it's being used the way it's being used. And we call this analytics plus feedback. So it's basically see what people are doing, ask them what's driving them to behave the way they do. And we think any decision you take in terms of improving, changing a site has to be driven by this type of data, or else you're just throwing darts randomly at a wall. So that's HotJar. And essentially the tools in it so on the analytics side, you've got like heat maps, session recording, so you replay what people are doing, funnels, form analytics, how people are using forms. And then on the feedback, you have a poll, you have a survey, we have a recruiter, and our newest feature is called incoming feedback. So a tiny feedback widget. So anyone at any time can just click on it and tell you, like, highlight an element and say, this sucks. Oh, I love this. This
Oh,
is broken.
that's new. I haven't seen that feature yet.
We released it 2 weeks ago. Yeah.
Oh, okay, nice. Yeah, because I tried HotJar about like a month ago. I mean, I'm not like a professional marketer or anything, but we've got a client and he asked us to help with his landing page, and we like, okay, we need to throw heat maps or something just to try to figure out what people like, what people not. You mentioned that basically you was creating tool HotJar. You was creating HotJar for a younger version of yourself, for the 10 years younger David, let's say it
Yeah.
in this way. So, but except yourself, I'm sure before you build it, you somehow was checking people's demand in such tool. Have you checked
That's a
demand?
good question. That's a good question.
And how you checked it?
That's a good question. It's very difficult to check in a numerical way for demand, but there are some tricks that I can share. So first off, I think the best way to have an awesome product idea for a new startup or service or whatnot is to be in the industry that you're building a startup for. So before I created HotJar, like I was a consultant working 2 years for really big brands. I was helping startups. So I was seeing consistently other people saying what I was feeling. So even though businesses were really, really big, and they had massive budgets, they were still saying the software is frustrating, it's complicated, I have too many software I need to use. So with HotJar, the idea was bring them all in one together and make them more affordable. So my point is, typically the idea comes from interacting with a lot of people. So my tip there is that if your idea is coming from these moments of isolation, so you're alone and you're thinking, oh, what if I did that, or what, it's actually less likely to succeed than if your idea came from interacting with a lot of people. So I'd say rather than measuring demand, it's one of the validators of it, right? So typically you validate demand not by thinking of an idea, but rather you're seeing many people mention the same thing. I call this kind of scratching your own itch, right? So it's something that you have, but you validate with others, so other people are saying it. Now, in terms of demand, in terms of understanding how big of interest there is for it, an interesting way of doing it is to use something called Google Trends. So Google Trends is a tool where you can go in and you can search how many people are actually searching for a particular search keyword. Now, the mistake that most people do is that they typically stop at only looking for keywords. Like in our case, we would have checked heat map. And we would have seen that's quite small, or we could have searched for, I don't know, session recording or survey, right? But the reality was that instead what we did was we looked at, okay, who do we consider to be the competitors of what we want to build, right? And we put in their brand names and we saw them, they were all relatively small. And then we did a comparison to look at, okay, we in our gut feel that this industry can become as big as other things, right? So for example, comparing it to things like, I don't know, MailChimp, right? Or SurveyMonkey, or are there the right ingredients for scaling that way? So we compared it to other markets like web analytics, feedback, qualitative. And it was interesting to see that other industries had much more players that had grown really big and that were really skyrocketing. And when you compare them to this industry, these were relatively very small interest, and they were mainly enterprisey. So our strategy was, okay, what if we leverage the same concept of what Basecamp, MailChimp did, but applied it to this industry that still hasn't taken off? And it's interesting to look today, 3 years later, at Google Trends to see HotJar break out from all of these and hopefully on track to becoming one of these brands, right? So my point is there are ways of checking for demand. So I would use a mix of both keywords and also a mix of brands. And then on the top of that, you can also do look at even more, let's say, bigger trends. So for example, we did a search for like UX or marketing or web marketers. And it's very clear that these are all areas that are really taking off and growing. So when you think about it, like we're really, really at the beginning of e-commerce. E-commerce is just starting. The concept of building a web marketing team, digital marketing team, really doing UX, these things many people don't realize are in their infancy. Like they're really just beginning. Many people take them for granted because they say, oh yeah, I've been a UX designer for a few years, so UX is old and boring. But if you really zoom out, you realize like we're just really taking off. And that's where you start to like seeing these macro trends of it's not something that's dropping, it's something that is increasing. So it's good to use Google Trends. I think it's very powerful.
Well, thank you for advice. First steps of HotJar was creating of MVP. I mean idea of validation, but like next step, like next development step was creation of MVP. And that word, minimal viable product, it's all coming from Lean Startup. And I'm sure you read it.
Yes.
What is your opinion about Lean Startup?
Like anything, there is no true kind of truth or religion to these things. So similarly, like with Agile, I think the best thing is to read these books and take away the most important things, but no one can debate that a startup would perform better if it's Agile and lean, and there is no doubt about it. So I'd say with HotJar, it's the reason for our success, and I've worked in many organizations, consulted tons of companies, and the only ones that are onto something are the ones that are lean. Like, so I'd say it's good to read about lean in general, not just lean startup. I'd say even go back to the source, read about where did lean come from, like why did Toyota experiment with these ideas. And it's basically the idea of creating things in an efficient way, right? And not being stupid. That's really what it's about. It's not spending months on end building something only to then discover that it's broken. So I think the reality is that we have no choice. The technology is cheap. Anyone can build anything. The barriers between markets are dropping. You can scale globally today, like HotJar did, like to multiple countries, thousands of customers really quickly. So the reality is you cannot afford to not be lean, actually. So you need to do iterative improvements. You can't have waste, and you have to work in the most kind of incremental way possible. Now, obviously, applying that to the MVP concept, I think it's a no-brainer. And the reality is, and this is where many people struggle, and the reality is we can do nothing to convince these people. So they either learn on their own or they take the leap of faith, which is, I'm a perfectionist, right? I need a product to be like spot on. But the reality is, like, until you do it that way and you fail, you don't really realize that users don't want a perfect product. They just want something which is better than what they had before. So you just need to ship to fill that expectation. And in fact, at HotJar, like we practice MVP constantly. So the kind of mantra we have is we say, if you're not a little bit ashamed of what you've shipped and released today, then you've gone too far. You have to be just a little bit ashamed, right? So it's important to just be a little bit ashamed. And the problem is many entrepreneurs and ambitious people are perfectionists, and it's so easy to let that go. But you have to let go.
Well, nice. Coming back to HotJar again, if I remember right, you don't have like a coding background or anything, you don't know how to code. While your team was building MVP, what you've been doing at that time, like how you've been promoting HotJar and like which marketing tricks you've been using at the time?
Very good question. And on the back of that, I'll start by saying, just because you don't code and you're an entrepreneur, it doesn't mean you should be ignorant, right? So probably I speak to our chief architect. My devs will kill me for saying this, but I probably ask smarter questions to him and dig into things more than maybe people who can code. Because essentially, code is a language. So it shouldn't stop you. Just because you don't know a language doesn't mean you can't talk about a language or understand someone who speaks that language. So I think it's, when it comes to code, it's all about systems. Again, systems, right? It's about understanding systems and how pieces work together. So I think I want to mention it because it's something I'm quite passionate about, which is if you can't code, you should still understand. So that's important as an entrepreneur. So what was I doing that time? So to begin with, I continued consulting in the first few months of HotJar. So I continued having clients, but I wasn't paid. I promised my co-founders that they would have a salary. So I put my money into the business. Another co-founder put money into business to pay salaries. And part of me putting in money was working 6 months as a consultant. And all the money I was making from consultancy was going into HotJar. So that took up maybe 30% of my time. The rest of the time I spent mainly on two things. So marketing, and it was mainly about demand. So essentially running the campaign, designing it, doing some ads, some outreach, getting it featured on communities. And then the second part was doing support. So it was myself and my co-founders. So we were speaking to our, because we released our MVP very quickly in beta stage, right? So as soon as we could, we got it out there and we invited people to use it. So we were actually doing support. We were speaking to them, answering questions, asking them. And actually, even before we released it, we created surveys. We got out there. We spoke to agencies. We asked them, like, what would you like to see in the product? What would be great? What would be horrible? So we were doing a lot of outreach, a lot of community building, a lot of this stuff.
You was looking for product market fit, right? It's called in this way.
Yeah, I would say so. We were really working hard on product market. That's a good point. We were.
Probably I'm wrong, but correct me if I'm wrong. But you was taking number one position on a product hunt for a while.
Actually, so I think we came third, second, and I think 2 weeks ago we came first, ironically with a guide, not with not with a product update. So but it's a little bit of luck on product hunt. But yeah, we've done very, very well with product hunt.
You've been hunted on a product hunt before your beta or after beta?
So we were hunted 4 times on product hunt. So we were hunted what was that? Was it we were hunted during the beta. We were hunted post the beta, so that we called it kind of HotJar version 1. And then we were hunted twice last month. So one of it was this incoming feedback release we did, which really took off. And we also just released a very interesting guide. So I took it, like, I really wanted to share a lot of the stuff that we learned from a startup SaaS point of view. So I organized an event in Malta called, obviously with the help of my co-founders in the team, something called the X Awards. So it's basically awarding early stage startups from an experience point of view. And we had a huge cash prize. We invited a ton of teams to come to Malta. We paid for everything. We invited amazing guests to come speak from Basecamp, from Price Intelligently. It was awesome. But then what we did was we created a guide with all that information. We've just published it, and we called it the Early Stage SaaS Startup Guide by HotJar. And so it's so ironic that we're a software company, but that got first place on Product Hunt. So it was hunted last week.
But anyways, it's bringing you new clients probably, I bet.
Yeah, and more than anything, it's fun to give back and like share a little bit. It gives us purpose. It helps also team spirit and stuff. So
product hunt as a resource to attract users, how necessary is it? Like how, for example, what was your results? What changed after product hunt?
Product hunt didn't have much impact at all. So we get this question a lot, especially when I advise some startups and I mentor some entrepreneurs as well. And there is this obsession about product hunt is the new TechCrunch, right? Before it's TechCrunch, Mashable, like, and before that was Dig, and like we're always like excited about the silver bullet, like get featured on one thing and then you're done. And the reality is, what happens for every startup when you get featured in these publications is you get this. So you get this big feature, you get 1,000 signups, but the reality is it's just like any other signups, right? So what's good is if you get it early on and your product is awesome, you get a ton of what I called sneezers, the early stage adopters, people who typically are on Product Hunt looking for cool new stuff, which is good, right? Because they spread the word really quickly. So it's a good thing to have, but like if you're not going to get first on Product Hunt, doesn't mean you're not going to succeed. And obviously, as time passes, the impact of Product Hunt on your startup goes down more and more and more. So until last month, when we were second and first in 1 month, and like it was a tiny blimp, right? So yeah, early on, it's a great way to get validation, get users on board, but I'd say do not put too much effort into it, because in the end, it's just a result. It's not really gonna make or break you.
While HotJar was in beta stage, you were saying in one of your interviews that people was trying to give you money to get instant access for HotJar. Just a curious question: what is the biggest amount of money people offer you?
That's interesting. We never got to a monetary amount, but we had people like what do I need to do? Who do I need to pay? What do I need to do? And I'd say it was a learning curve for us, because we were like shitting ourselves literally at the end of the beta. Like, are we gonna make any money? So my advice to anyone who does something similar is I would get people to commit with their credit card at a certain stage, because that's the best form of validation, as opposed to someone give you your email, someone says it's like Kickstarter, right? So basically you pay for something before it even exists. So if I had to repeat it again, I would just go one step closer towards getting a credit card on file, because then we'd feel much more comfortable.
Oh, yeah. So you got a crazy amount of users who sign up for a beta. Let me check. It was something like 18,000 users.
So we had 18,000 active users in the beta, and we had 60,000 signups.
Whoa. Okay, then what was the biggest challenge to transfer those beta users to, let's say, for first 100 payable customers?
Yeah, the biggest challenge was actually stopping doing the work on the product to suddenly start doing e-commerce work, like transactional stuff, right? So it was like, oh shit, now we need to build all that stuff, right? Processing credit cards and interacting with a payment gateway. So that was a challenge. I'd say communicating it was also a challenge, but we did really well. And my advice would be to be super transparent about it. Like, it's coming, you have a month, what's going to happen, the stages, and all these things.
And how many new users signing up to HotJar nowadays? Let's say how many new users you got every week?
I wouldn't know every week, but I think we have new accounts created every month is around 17,000, I think. Roughly something on those lines. It varies per month.
But of course, not every single one is
I'd say
a paying customer.
The big majority of them don't even use the product, right? So, and this is the key, that when you're building something at scale, you need to start factoring these in. Like, again, many times I advise startups, they think 100 people are going to sign up and they're going to become customers. But the reality is 100 sign up, 20 of them don't have time. 30 of them realize it was not the right tool. 20 of them don't have enough money, or the technology has a problem, or the developer was busy. So you see my point, like the number starts dropping a lot. So that's why it's so important that you have to think big, because it's not that easy to transform a user into a customer, right? So I'd say overall, over time, maybe 6-7% of people that sign up to HotJar become a customer. So it makes you realize how important it is to have like a huge market, huge amount of people that could potentially be a customer, because that means so many people can come through the funnel.
Okay. And now let's speak a little bit about time frames. Actually, how long it took for you to build up HotJar, like from the day one when you got that idea and say, okay, I'm all in, to the point when it was released to public? How long it took?
So look, initially when we had the idea, the very first thing we wanted to do before we shared this crazy idea with anyone was we wanted to make sure this is feasible. So we spent 2-3 months making sure, technologically speaking, can we create a recording? Can we do a heat map? Can it be done at scale? It took us around 2 months to verify that. So once we did that, we launched the website, which mentioned what we were going to be doing. And we started collecting emails. Like, we went as quickly as possible because I wanted to learn from my previous experience, right? Which is building for a year and then no one wants to use it. And we started seeing traction very quickly. So then we spent, I think, 3-4 months building and promoting only. But then very quickly we started inviting people from the beta, and then we spent around 6 months actually people aggressively testing HotJar and giving us feedback. And then we moved out and we went commercial.
So it took you a little bit more than a year to go from idea to...
Yeah, roughly was around a year, I think, yeah.
So for 1 year, I bet it was original team of 5 members, of 5 co-founders who worked on a HotJar at those days. But how big is your team nowadays?
So now we're, I think, around 44 people.
Mm-hmm. I know you've got a very interesting company culture, that your words is that people shouldn't be managed, but should be led and shown the way. Can you share like general takeaways of how you led your company, like main rules or something?
So the question is, how do we put this into practice, or you want, or something?
Yes. Basically, for example, can you name like 5 main rules which you follow when you leading your company?
While leading, now I got it. Rules in terms of leading. So yeah, rather than rules, it's like more like, how do we do it? Like, what guides us? I'd say the most important thing is transparency. So for example, the meetings where the leadership team meets to decide, they're recorded and open to the whole team. And the reasoning behind that is, for anyone who wants to listen, like understand the logic of a decision, listening to the reasoning behind it is really powerful, right? So that's one. 2 is definitely communication, in terms of communicating as early as possible and looping people in to be part of it, as opposed to letting them know at the very end, oh, by the way, here's what we're going to do. So bring people on board and do it together. Getting feedback early is something that we do a lot, which is, you don't wait until you finish something to get feedback. Like, we encourage a lot, get feedback even if you're still at the idea stage or designing something, you get feedback as quickly as possible. Other stuff when it comes to leadership. Similarly, we also say give feedback very quickly. We like the idea of the 1-minute manager. It's a great book. It's this whole idea that when someone does something good or bad, like, you address it very quickly instead of waiting to do like big reviews or whatnot. What else do we do? Oh yes, and then discipline. So it's something that we're becoming better at, and we weren't that good at early on. But discipline of planning something well, of describing it well, and also of aligning everyone. So taking the necessary time to write up the brief, the plan, so that everyone understands. And usually it's very easy for teams to take shortcuts, and that's where you're not disciplined, and that's when you're not really leading. That's where you're kind of back to managing again.
On the internet, I found one post of your past employee. And the person was saying that she was working crazy hours in HotJar, but it was totally her choice, and also there was several more reasons why she quit, so no offense at all. But question I wanted to ask is how many hours your employees is spending in you work remotely, so how many hours your employees is working weekly?
That's a very, very good question. One of the dangers of working remote is it's very difficult to stop, right? To switch. And then especially at HotJar, we have this concept of freedom, which is we want people to be able to work the hours they want, um, to be able to manage their days. Like if I want to run off and do an errand, then I can come back and work later. So we give a lot of flexibility and freedom. But typically, because we find people who are so passionate and love the job and everything, it's very easy to overwork. So it varies a lot. In my case, I'm the CEO, right? So it's difficult for me to share like the hours because I live and breathe this role. But although I work very long hours, then I have the ability that maybe after this call I go spend 15 minutes playing with my kids. You know what I mean? So there's ups and downs. But I'd say many of us work more than they should, and I'd say I'd say many of us work probably like 40 to 50 hours a week.
Mm-hmm. So, but 40 hours a week, it's not so brutal. I mean, it's regular working hours.
Yeah,
So,
I'd say more like 50 is probably like that's what I meant by yeah.
and actually, good things that you mentioned, overworking. What is your way to protect your team from overworking or overslacking? Is there any particular advice you can give, like how to make sure that your team won't spend whole their life in office, or how to make sure the team won't like basically sit on their races and doing nothing and getting money?
Yeah. What we do is we create a lot of projects. So for example, we had a wellness project. So we gave a budget to everyone on the team. Obviously, we don't have the time to go into all the detail right now because I just realized the time. But we we create projects, so a wellness project. So you have a budget and you go do something fun and you go do something which is focused on your wellness and you share it with the team. So you only get the money if you share it. So we embrace the remote culture and we share these things. Besides that, we give a lot of leave days off, like we get a good package. We give a holiday budget as well. But then we also, like similar to leading versus managing, no one approves your vacation leave. So you approve your own vacation leave. So you just plan it. And then we also are starting to shame people who are not taking vacation leave. So I think it's important to kind of share like our travels to kind of, I think the most important thing is to show that we are in an environment where it's safe and it's okay to take time off and to think of yourself. I think that's the most important thing, and that comes typically from the small things, especially the way the leadership talk about rest and vacation and mental health. So it's the small things, showing that we appreciate these things.
Okay, and we have a little bit time left. I see that you're sort of in hurry, so I've got three last questions. Question number one, I know that all new employees is getting like getting something like 4,000 blah 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 dollars to build up their own office. What is the maybe you know answer, maybe not, it doesn't matter, but what was the worst waste of those money in your history?
The worst waste of that money, which we still recovered from, was someone joined the team and went and bought a huge kick-ass desktop computer, and we're like, we're a remote company, so you have to buy a laptop. But we managed to return it to Amazon, luckily. So
Okay. My second question will be, I know you're a big fan of reading. Can you recommend like two or maybe three books to entrepreneurs, which will help them? Of course, number one probably will be a lean startup, but any other recommendation in books?
I even though it's a weird book, it's actually had a big impact on me. So I would recommend reading Fast Lane Millionaire, which is really good. It's just the general principles of why the hell are you an entrepreneur. So it talks about the things like freedom, fitness, family. It's a good read. Why do you want to be an entrepreneur, and what do you hope to get out of it? So it's a really good book. Another great book is E-Myth. E-Myth. It talks about like the myth of building a business, and then you realize that you're actually just getting a worse job. So I think it's a really good book. And then for all entrepreneurs who are like me in the digital business, I highly recommend Selling the Invisible. It's a wonderful book.
Mhm. Okay, so thank you for book recommendation. And my last question, actually, it's not a question, but can you give advice for those who becoming first-time founders who only starting their entrepreneur path?
The one big piece of advice, and actually comes with another book with it, is
Nice.
the most important thing that you need to learn as an entrepreneur is, in the end, you are building a business, you're building a brand, and the game you're playing is less, ironically, of a product game than you might think, and more a perception game of brand, right? So I was in marketing. I would consider myself to be someone really good in marketing, and I hadn't really understood it. So when I meet technical people starting a business, they obviously, the gap is even bigger. So a great book to read, at least to kind of get in the right mindset, is The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. Amazing book about positioning and understanding that in the end, when you create a business, a product, a service, it's taking a position in a market's brain. So it's all about how do you position yourself there? And obviously it's about product, it's about marketing, it's about content, it's all these things. But in the end, the only thing that matters is what is that position that you take.
Okay, well, thank you a lot for
You're very welcome.
all advices